Ardra Sheppard has been living with multiple sclerosis for more than 15 years. As a blogger, she shares her interest in social justice issues surrounding accessibility and the destigmatization of disability. So we wanted to find out more about her story.
I went to the hospital, had a bunch of tests, and the next day I was told there's a 50% chance you might have MS. Within a month, I had blindness in my right eye, and I started to have mobility problems and sensory symptoms like numbness, and I was diagnosed. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, my mobility started to be impacted in a way that I couldn't, my illness was no longer invisible, but I also couldn't hide it anymore. I was really walking with a limp. It became necessary for me to use a cane. And that was a really difficult transition for me. It was kind of a watershed moment recently when Selma Blair showed up at the Vanity Fair Oscars red carpet with her blinged out cane and really showed somebody with showed a young person with a disability in a glamorous light in Hollywood. I remember Googling cane style and how to make a cane look cool. That whole transition of accepting first a cane and then a walker was very, I was processing what was happening to me physically, but socially, emotionally, on a style, superficial level, I felt like I no longer had access to the beauty industry. I decided, after much searching, that I was going to be the example that I was looking for. So I hired a stylist and a makeup artist and a fashion photographer, and I did my own photo shoot with my mobility aids. And I featured them loud and proud, and then I started putting them on Instagram. I hashtagged them Babes with Mobility Aids, and people started to notice. And people started tagging their own photos with the same hashtag. And that was really kind of everything.
Amazing. And I'm so happy she started doing that. Ardra actually joins me now, as well as neurologist Dr. Jiwon Oh. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us. And I want to start, Ardra, with you and your blog, which is called Tripping on Air.
Yes.
And you talk a little bit about seeing Selma Blair and seeing this example of a disability and glamour, and the two mixed together. Is this the thing that inspired you to start the blog?
No, actually, I started the blog 4 years ago, so well in advance of Selma, but she was sort of the first high-profile celebrity example to find, but I really had started this, I was looking for those examples before they were out there.
Right.
Yeah, and just trying to put that out there myself in the world.
So Dr. O, I want to go back to you now and just talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts. What is multiple sclerosis?
So MS, or multiple sclerosis, is a very common neurological disease in Canada and in some other parts of the world. And it's actually one of the few chronic neurological diseases that affects young people, and actually mainly young women. And it's thought to be an inflammation disease that affects the brain and spinal cord. And people typically present in their 20s and 30s. And it can be a bit of a puzzle initially, just because, at that age, a lot of people tend to kind of shrug off symptoms a lot. So it's not uncommon that there's quite a bit of a delay before people are diagnosed.
And who is at risk for this? You say young women. Are there any particular groups, or are we looking for a genetic connection?
So the problem is, there's a lot of research happening throughout the world, but we don't quite know what the exact cause of MS is. But what we know is that, it tends to affect people in certain regions of the world. So the farther you are from the equator, the higher the prevalence of MS in that area. And that is why Canada is one of the hotspots of the world. Over time, we've been able to discover that link is probably because of sunlight exposure and low vitamin D. So we know that having a low vitamin D increases your risk of developing MS. But then at the same time, it's a bit more complicated because, for instance, say in Inuit populations that obviously don't get a lot of sunlight exposure and probably have lower vitamin D levels, the incidence of MS is pretty low. So it's probably, in the end, a combination of genes and environment, and that exact interplay we're still trying to figure out.
Which is why research is so important.
Yes.
That is very interesting. I think we all learned something there that I hadn't heard of before. So I want to talk, Ardra, about some of the symptoms.
Yes.
How is it presenting for you?
So I actually was diagnosed very quickly. Some people will go for many, many years without a diagnosis, but I woke up with loss of vision in one eye. I was very young, so I thought I was invincible. I thought I was having stress-related migraines, but about 2 weeks later, I really couldn't see at all out of my left eye. Okay. And then 2 weeks after that, my right eye was impacted and I started to have mobility problems, some sensory issues. I was diagnosed within 6 weeks.
How old were you?
22.
22 years old.
Yeah.
And so you go to the doctor, they give you this diagnosis.
Yep.
What are you thinking?
I thought my life was over. It was terrifying. I was really, that's a very young age to sort of see your whole future come crashing down around you. When I was diagnosed, the treatments were not as good as they are now. We still have work to be done, but we have made a lot of advances since then.
Let's talk a little bit about the treatments then. What can be done?
You know, in the last 10 years, it's been a really important time in MS because the number of treatments that we have nearly doubled. Okay. And that is huge progress. And so the other piece is, I think in the field, we're also recognizing how important it is to, diagnose people rapidly and get them started on the appropriate treatment rapidly, because we're understanding that early treatment is really important. But as you alluded to, and I think you put it so nicely, there is a lot of work to be done because a particular type of MS, progressive MS, and there's two types of progressive MS, we don't yet have great treatments. There's a lot of resources being devoted to this, including with the MS Society of Canada. There's a huge national study that just started, and we are leading the study at St. Michael's Hospital.
Okay, so work is being done. I love to hear that there are double the amount of treatments these days. What I want to hear from Ardra before we go is just your everyday challenges. How has that been lately? How are you coping with them? How are you doing?
I mean, I always like to say you need 3 things to be happy in life. So something to do, something to look forward to, and someone to love. And so I think my disease and my disability don't take those things away from me. I have a lot of purpose that I find in writing, my blog especially. And I have a great support system, and I've always got something to look forward to.
Good. Yeah. Those are good rules for everyone's life, I would say. Yeah. Very good. Thank you for sharing your story. Dr. Oh, thank you so much for coming with us with some of that research and the information.